Right, good morning everyone. Welcome to today's Agrivoltaics workshop. My name is Tony Via. I'm with the Tas Farm Innovation Hub, one of 4 hubs that are participating in AgriFutures funded projects centred on plant production agrivoltaics across Southern Australia. Today we have 2 speakers, each presenting key insights from this project. First, Dr. Sabine Tausz-Posch, who is a Senior Lecturer, School of Agriculture, Food and Ecosystem Sciences, Faculty of Science at the University of Melbourne. Her presentation is titled Harvesting the Sun Twice, First Results of Plant Production Agrivoltaics Across Southern Australia. And our second presenter is Ganesh Pandey, PhD candidate, Environmental Engineering at the School of Engineering here at the University of Tasmania. His presentation is titled Modelling and Optimising Vine and Solar Co-Production. Following both presentations, there's an opportunity for Q&A. Alternatively, for those who are in attendance in person, you can ask the presenters questions at the light lunch following our workshop. Lastly, this presentation is being recorded and will be available online shortly following the workshop. I'll hand it over to Dr. Sabine.
Thank you so much, Tony, for the introduction, and thank you so much for letting me present these first results from our project here today in Tasmania. Okay, just briefly, what I'm going to discuss in that presentation, a little bit of an overview. So just not sure whether everybody is familiar with agrivoltaics, so I just very briefly introduce the concept. And also will then explain why it might be really interesting to investigate agrivoltaics for a plant production system in the context of Australia. And then I briefly introduce the project, particularly the objectives that we were trying to meet over the past year and a half. And then I'm going to present first results. So first from Victoria, this is where I'm located, and we have collected already 2 seasons of data. So I'm going to show some of those findings first. And then I'm also going to show some results from South Australia and Western Australia, who just finished now the first season of agrivoltaics in vineyards. And then one last slide where I just introduce agrivoltaics in a horticultural production system that we have just launched very recently in Victoria. Okay, so first of all, what is agrivoltaics? So this is when generally agricultural production systems are co-located with solar arrays. That can be now in an animal context, but it can be also in a plant context. In an animal context, particularly holding sheep underneath panels is increasing in popularity, and I've seen some really good outcomes from that type of co-location. So I found that sheep actually have better wool quality, for example. I have seen data that lamb mortality, for example, is decreased when they are co-located with the solar arrays, because the lambs are just more protected from predators, but also from harsh environmental conditions, and also like less heat stress in sheep because of the shade that the panels are actually delivering. I'm particularly, so my background is in plant science, so I'm really interested in co-locating those solar arrays with plant production systems. But why would you do that? What are kind of proposed benefits about that? Well, the first one is pretty obvious. If you look at the graph, at the diagram bottom right, you can see that it actually increases the land use efficiency. And it does that because you're not only producing crops on one stretch of land and solar energy on a different patch of land, but you combine it and do both at the same time. The next 2 benefits, they relate now to the plants that actually grow underneath those panels. So first of all, the panels actually can create a microclimate that can be very beneficial for selected crops. So the panels protect them from heat stress, from intense radiation. And also, point 3, they can actually help to save some water, because evapotranspiration, so that means loss of water from the soil, and plants is reduced, and that saves some water for the crops. The final proposed benefit is actually that also the panels benefit when they are integrated in plant production systems And the reason for that is because the plants keep it slightly cooler underneath, and that benefits the efficiency of the panels. Because while panels do need a lot of light intensity, high temperatures is actually a negative for the efficiency, and efficiency decreases from 25 degrees onwards. There's other proposed benefits as well. For example, if farmers now really integrate solar panels into their crop production systems, that helps them to transition to renewable energy, what becomes more and more important in terms of transitioning to zero net emissions in agriculture. But also, for example, worker conditions are better when you have panels on top because of the shaded environment. And I can talk from my own experience, and it was also verified by colleagues from South Australia and Western Australia. It's much nicer to do measurements underneath the panels than in the open field, because it can be nice, can be a nice day in the field, but very often it's pretty harsh. Okay, so most people say when we suggest putting panels on top of plants, but that doesn't work because plants need light to drive photosynthesis, and that's very true. Like, plant photosynthesis is the underpinning process of plants. That's how they produce sugar, and that sugar is used for biomass accumulation, will also co-determine the yield of a plant. But that doesn't mean that a plant grows more the more light it has, okay? And that can be very easily demonstrated with a light response curve. What is a light response curve? This is when plant scientists measure rates of photosynthesis, so how much sugar is being produced in response to increasing light intensity. So we start at zero light, that means darkness, and then the light intensity is increased stepwise until about 2000 ppfd, so that's photosynthetic photon flux density. And you can see that photosynthesis indeed increases steeply from zero light to about 800 ppfd, but then levels out. And the reason for that is because photosynthesis is actually light saturated. So that means all that light here is in excess. Plants can't really use that, okay? How often does that happen in the environment? Well, in Australia, actually very often, because we have a lot of radiation. So this is a nice graph taken from a publication that was coming out from Wagga Wagga, and it shows the light intensities measured in a vineyard throughout the season, and all the data points that are in the pink cloud, they would show light intensities that are higher than photosynthetic capacity is in those grapevines. What does it mean for plants? Actually, they have lots of protective mechanisms to get rid of that excess light, but especially when we combine it with high temperature stress and water limitation, that excess radiation can go wild in cells and actually lead to cell death and scorching of leaves, for example. So it can be pretty harmful. So the question is, can we actually now create with the panels an environment that is beneficial for the plants that grow underneath? So taking away a little bit of the stressful high radiation, but still giving enough radiation so that photosynthesis can run at maximum capacity. So what I did next, that was just before I started with my own research in that context, I thought, what do they actually find in the literature globally? And it's all globally because we don't have so many data from Australia yet. When they grow now crops underneath those panels, you can see a range of different crops, and you don't need to look at the details of that slide, just maybe the three columns. Left would indicate that the plant had an advantage, yield advantage, when it was growing underneath the panel. Middle column would mean no change in yield, whereas right column would mean disadvantage. And when I had finished that overview, I thought, this is very messy. There's no clear picture at all. And that is a very typical sign for agrivoltaics. It's the interactions are so strong and they need actually unraveling that we actually understand how a particular crop will respond in a particular environment under those management conditions. Why is that? Because some crop types are better suitable for growth in more shaded conditions than others. Even down to the variety, there are differences. Also, it depends whether you have agrivoltaics in a temperate climate or whether you have it in a hot or arid climate. The results will just differ. And another really important factor is actually the design of the structure. So do you put more shade on those crops or less? That will all affect what result you have. So there's a lot of unraveling to do that we really can make informed decisions going forward if we think that agrivoltaics is something that is worthwhile pursuing into the future. So just one example also here from Germany, because they had actually, they grew potatoes underneath the panels. One year they found there was a disadvantage on yield, so that the yield was lower underneath the panels. In the second year, it was higher. What was the difference? The first year was a typical climate where we have plenty of rainfall and moderate stresses otherwise. And there was a disadvantage on yield, but the second year was a hot, dry season for Germany. And this was when the panels really helped to protect those potatoes, and actually they yielded higher than outside. So even, the season can actually quite heavily affect the outcome. So this is now really where our project comes in, where we came together, as Tony said, 4 states across southern Australia, and where we thought we would like to test how agrivoltaics works under Australian conditions. And we chose actually vineyards as our production system because the wine industry is heavily affected by climate stresses, heat stresses, and so on, depending on where you sit in Australia. So the project itself ran from 2024 and finishes up actually in a couple of months. It looks like a 3-year project, but really is not. We only had 18 months and we were quite squashed for time. So we were quite busy over those 18 months. What are the main objectives of this project? The first one was to really expand and diversify agrivoltaics demonstration sites across the southern states. And what we did, so we have now agrivoltaic structures in Victoria, South Australia, and Western Australia, all in vineyards. And then in Victoria, we also expanded to a horticultural production system. And in this case, it's strawberries. I have to say that in Victoria, we installed the facility already a year before because I had already a pilot grant for that. So I could do that already before this project started. But South Australia and Western Australia only did that now in the last year. And then once the facilities were installed just in time for the latest season, then it was about collecting performance data. And I will present some results in a moment. And then another really big component of that project is modeling the agrivoltaics conditions. And Ganesh will talk about that in detail with the second presentation. Okay, so this is just a picture of the facilities that we have now in Australia installed in vineyards. So on the left side, that's my own playground. That's in Victoria. So that was installed actually at the University of Melbourne Dookie campus, where we have a research farm and a very small vineyard, but it's good enough to trial actually agrivoltaics. And the middle one, that's the one that was installed last year, September, October. That's in Western Australia in the Bickley Valley. And then on the right side, that was installed at a commercial grower in Adelaide, close to Adelaide in the McLaren Vale. They look maybe similar when you look quickly at them, but they're still quite different demonstration sites. So first of all, they all have different varieties. We work with Sauvignon Blanc in Victoria. In Western Australia, they're testing Shiraz and Mataro in South Australia. But then also in terms of how much shade we actually introduce to those production systems is quite different. In Victoria, I stayed pretty conservative and decided on a shade of about 30%. Whereas in Western Australia, they have introduced quite a bit more shade, so a ground cover ratio of about 50 to 60%. I don't have the exact data for South Australia, but it's lower actually than we are in Victoria. And you can see that this structure actually has only second row panels on top. And the reason for that is because the South Australia team also would like to investigate whether the installation of the structure itself already affects the vineyard. And so they're testing that every second row, and then every other row, that's where we have the panels on top as well. So they have introduced another treatment there. Okay, so in terms of once the structures were up, what did we collect in terms of data? So we're interested in the physiology, so how the plants perform. We looked at photosynthesis for obvious reasons, because we are playing around with the light environment, and also some data about light use chemistry. And then we followed morphology, so is canopy growth affected? And we also looked at some leaf characteristics. And then, of course, at the end of the season, yield and yield components. We looked at berry juice quality, and then also at energy yield in terms of how the panels perform differently compared to a normal ground-mounted system. So the next few slides will be now results for Victoria, where I can present results from 2 seasons, and then just a bit of comparison with what South Australia and Western Australia has found. In terms of physiology, we're not going into too much detail there, but I will just briefly explain that this is about gas exchange of plants. So this is all about how much CO2 plants take up to produce sugar through photosynthesis. That's the top row. And the bottom row that gives you indication about the stomatal conductance. These are the little pores that we find on leaves on leaves. And this is where also plants lose their water. So it gives you an indication about transpiration. What I have done here, so top left, this is photosynthesis in the first year, top right, photosynthesis in the second year, measured throughout the season. And what we found was there was a date effect. So that means the rates change throughout the season, and that's not surprising because plants just develop. And that was not surprising at all, but there was no treatment effect. So the panels on top did not affect how much photosynthesis was actually taking place in those grapevines. What about stomatal conductance? Same, so again, date effects, but no effect of the treatment, so of the panels on top. The next one is a really detailed measurement of how plants use the light once it's absorbed. The one is electron transport rate, and the second one gives you an indication about the photocenters, how many are open. Don't need all the details, but interesting was, again, we had some date effects or changes throughout the season, but again, the treatment, so the panels on top, did not have an effect on any photochemistry. So that what we concluded for Victoria is that the decrease in light intensity of about 30%, so the shade that we introduced, did not affect those photosynthetic processes. What about growth? Quite a different picture now to physiology. So morphology is quite heavily affected by the panels on top. So the top row, what we have done is we have just made pictures every 2 weeks throughout the season of selected vines outside, so in the control, and then underneath the facility. And that would be just like one example for control on top, and one example for a grapevine grown underneath the panels in the lower row. And I think even just looking at that, you can see that under the agrivoltaics, obviously, the plant area index is increasing quite a bit more throughout the season compared to the control. And that was verified also by the data. So we have quite a bit more canopy development underneath the panels. Where does that come from? So do they make more canes or what is it? We actually found when we did the pruning weights last year in June from the first season, that there was no difference in the number of shoots. So the same number of canes were pruned from the control and from grapevines underneath the panels. However, so same number of shoots, the length was much longer underneath the agrivoltaics facility. And that was not caused by an increase of number of nodes, but actually the internodes, so the parts between the nodes, they were much longer in the AV facility. And that is a very typical shade response of a plant to make longer internodes when there is less light. Also, we found interesting in adaptations in respect to the leaves. So we looked at a specific leaf area that gives you an indication how thin or thick a leaf is. And in the first season and the second season, it was totally consistent that the leaves were thinner in grapevines grown underneath the panels compared to outside. And that is also a very typical shade adaptation, so fits together really well also with those longer internodes. So summarizing, no effects on photosynthesis before, but effects on growth. And the reason for that is because light is not only driving photosynthesis, but the spectral composition of the light triggers lots of developmental adjustments in the plant. So we haven't measured that aspect yet, but it seems that the spectrum composition actually changes underneath the AV facility, and that introduces that shade adaptation. There's mostly about a change in red to far red ratio that triggers that. And that has been found in a study from Italy, where they have measured that spectral composition is pretty much the same what we find here. Okay, so most importantly, yield. In Victoria, we did not have effects on yield in both seasons, and that fits pretty well together. We also didn't have a difference actually in photosynthesis. So those 30% of light reduction in Dookie, so pretty warm region, let's say in the Goulburn Valley, did not have really an effect on yield. What about quality? Some interesting results really with quality. However, I start with the not so interesting ones, which is, so sugar, no difference in sugar in the first season. However, less sugar under the AV facility in the second season. No difference in yarn, so that's yeast, available nitrogen, important for the fermentation, for winemaking. No difference between the two treatments last year and also not this year. So some consistent responses in terms of yarn, differences in sugar. I just leave it here at the moment. Really interesting you got when we looked at all sorts of acidity-related parameters, where we found in both years exactly the same results. So in both years, the pH value was lower in grapes grown underneath the panels, and the titratable acidity was higher in the grapevines, in the grapes grown underneath the panels as well. So more acidity retention in the berries underneath the panels, and same also malic acid was higher. So for us, that's actually a good outcome, because we grow Sauvignon Blanc. It's a white grape in a very warm region. And with the changing climate, those grapes really struggle with too much sugar partly, but also with a loss of acidity. And when you have, then you end up with a boring wine more or less. So actually having this outcome for us was good, because it indicates a fresher and crisper wine as an outcome. Okay, a really interesting aspect of that work is what I would like to show here is based on the work that I do in collaboration with ANU. So this is Marco Ernst. He's an engineer there, and he is really interested in the performance of panels. So what he does, actually, he compares the performance of the panels integrated in the vineyard with a ground-mounted system, a very small one that we have also installed at the Dookie campus as a comparison, where underneath we just pretty much spray out the grass like many conventional systems would do. And what he found was that, so he models, we use monofacial panels, but he models this as if we would use bifacial values, because they are the panels that you use They are the cutting edge panels. They are the thing to install nowadays if you don't put them on a roof. And the bifacial panels, they have the advantage that they actually can also produce electricity from radiation that's being reflected back from the ground. And what he found here is that there's a lot more reflection coming back from the panels when they are installed in the vineyard compared to the ground-mounted system. So red curve, that's the reflection coming back from the vineyard compared to the ground-mounted system. So this is during the course of a day, and you can see that it's particularly much greater during the midday hours. If you look at seasonal variation, a lot more reflectance coming back during the summer months, which is not too surprising because this is when our grapevines have a lush canopy. And that actually has a really significant effect on electricity production. So he calculated it's about 5% more electricity efficiency potential for the panels when they integrated in the vineyard compared to the ground-mounted system. And then you add another, I think, about 1.5% of efficiency because the panels are actually about 4 to 5 degrees cooler when they are integrated in the vineyard compared to the ground-mounted systems. So first conclusions from Victoria was really, we were pretty pleased with that. Positive effects on berry quality in respect to that acidity that I just explained before, no yield penalties, and actually the panels performing better when they are integrated in the vineyard. So how does it now compare with results from the collaborators? Let's have a look at morphology first. So growth, canopy growth development during the season. On the right side here, data from South Australia. And the green and blue line, they would indicate grapevines grown underneath the facility. Blue is structure and panels, green only the structure. And you can see that, in fact, they are growing quite a bit stronger, very similar to what we found in Victoria. Western Australia, there was maybe a slight trend towards greater growth underneath the panels, but definitely not as strong as what we found in Victoria and in South Australia. But an explanation about that in a moment. What about yield? So yield was, we had a little bit of teething issues in that respect. Let's go to South Australia first. So overall, they found that controls, so grapes outside of the facility, had a tendency towards the higher yield, and then you had less yield underneath the facility without panels and the least underneath the facility with the panels. However, the problem was they didn't manage to put netting on top of the grapevines underneath the facility, whereas the control was netted. So they had actually a lot of bird damage going on underneath the facility. And the interesting thing is that the bird damage was greatest where the panels were on top, and then a little bit less so where the structure is, but still the structure. And then, the control was netted anyway. So we can't really trust those results at the moment because of that damage. But they had also another interesting observation that actually the single berry rate was greater in the grapevines grown underneath the panels, and they thought if there would have been no bird damage, maybe they would have even had a higher yield underneath the facility. But we have to wait for another season, I think, to see that. Very different picture in Western Australia. You can see much higher yield in the control compared to the agrivoltaics facility, but also small teething issues there because there are inherent differences across that experimental site. So they only checked that out later. They found that the grapevines used as control, they have a greater trunk diameter, longer cordons, more spurs were retained, a greater number of canes, and that all has contributed to that yield outcome. So they have some satellite images. I think they can maybe cross-calibrate, but in general, I think they will just need to wait for another season and see. But yeah. Okay, so what about quality results? Left side is sugar concentrations, top is Western Australia, bottom is South Australia. So Western Australia, they didn't find a difference in sugar in grapes, whereas the South Australians found actually higher sugar underneath the AV facility. A little bit more about that in a moment. And what about acidity-related parameters? So pH was actually lower in grapevines, in berries underneath the structure in South Australia, and there was also a tendency for lower pH in Western Australia, and then similar to what we found in Victoria, higher titratable acidity in grapes underneath the facility in Western Australia, and the same in South Australia, and they have really followed that throughout the season, and it was really consistent. Okay, so that brings me now to the summary. Just comparing now all three states, do we find common patterns? Where do we not find common patterns? Where is there confusion? So in terms of physiology, so gas exchange, photosynthesis, light use, efficiency, we didn't find a difference, but the data from Western Australia and South Australia are still to be evaluated, and we need to wait for those results before we can make conclusions. What about growth? There's strong consensus across all three states. There's definitely more growth underneath the facility, so that was coming through very clearly. I might jump down to lower berry juice pH and higher acidity. That was also very clear across all three states. We had the same trends and they were very strong. Different in terms of yield. We in Victoria didn't have an effect on yield, but we have seen South Australia and Western Australia. They had some issues, hence we need to wait still until we can make firm conclusions there. With berry juice sugar, so there is a lot of dynamic going on because we found really pretty much everything. So we had higher values underneath the AV facility, lower values underneath the AV facility, or no effect at all. So there's still a lot more unraveling to do. We don't understand it now yet. So we just need a little bit more work done on that. And then in terms of higher energy yield, definitely positive outcomes for Victoria, but data from Western Australia and South Australia is still pending. Okay, as a last slide, just would like to mention that we have now started to look also into a different type of production system. So we have just installed a similar facility in the Yarra Valley at a commercial strawberry grower. And the reason for that is because berries come originally from understory settings. They can be really harshly affected by heat stress and water stresses. So we thought that might be a good contender to see how they respond to an agrivoltaic setting and compare it with the vineyard. Whether they may be more suitable or less suitable maybe than some of those findings that we have so far. Okay, and that was pretty much the presentation. Thank you so much. I think we have been a great team for a quite challenging project, but also a really fun project. So the South Australia team that's from the University of Adelaide, especially Cass and Sean. Then Tasmania, obviously Ganesh and Matthew, Tony and Hannah, who worked heavily on that project, and Ganesh will present all the modelling work in a moment. Western Australia, Joe Wisdom, Doug and Caitlin were fantastic, advancing work in Western Australia in that respect. And then our team here is Bo Suter, who is great help in the field, Arjun, who is doing soil-related stuff in Victoria. Chris is managing the vineyard, and Billy is our wine quality specialist. And so he has done lots of those quality analyses, and we just actually did micro-ferment some grapes from this season, and they were just sent off to the lab for more analysis. Thank you.
Thanks, Sabine. Second presenter, Ganesh. I'll set yourself up.
Thank you, Sabine, for this excellent presentation. Hi, everyone. My name is Ganesh. I am a PhD student at University of Tasmania. In my PhD project, I am working on agrivoltaic system, where we are trying to look at optimizing solar PV systems layout for livestock production, mainly on sheep grazing under the solar panels. But in this project, I was this opportunity to look at modeling how vine yield, what is the impact of solar panels on vine growth and yield. My supervisor in this project is Professor Matthew Tom Harrison. He's also here in University of Tasmania. Right. So in this modeling work, we were aiming at looking at how different climate variability and PV system layouts impact on grape yield under the solar panels, and also depending on the layout of solar panels, how much energy can we generate from given land area. We have termed this co-location combining grape yield with solar energy generation as Vitivoltaics, VT word for vines, and then voltaics for photovoltaics, use of solar panels to generate electricity. And our overall goal was to optimize this Vitivoltaic layout according to vineyards. So different vineyards have different row spaces between vines, and also the climate is different. So our aim was to find out optimal layout for each vineyard site. There were pilot projects being carried out at 3 different locations with different diverse climates. So we in our case study modeling, we look at these 3 locations: Dookie, Victoria, McLaren Vale, Southern Australia, and Plumstead, Western Australia. And from the graph, we can see there is this difference in quite a bit in rainfall, and also solar radiation, maximum minimum temperature. So these are site-specific weather climate variability, and we're trying to, through modeling, account for how these weather variability also impact on vine, in addition to how solar panels layout impact on vine yield and energy generation. So for this modeling work, we considered 4 different types of Vitivoltaics layouts. So for the first one, VV1 is where one solar panel is installed above each of the vine, whereas in VV2, 2 solar panels above each row of vines, and VV3, every other vine has 1 solar panel on top of it, and then VV4, where 2 solar panels are on top of every other vine rows. Also, one thing to note here is that as Sabine mentioned, the 3 sites had different vine design characteristics. Like, for example, in Western Australia, the distance between 2 vines was only 2.4 meters, whereas in Victoria and South Australia, the difference was around 3.5 meters. So that smaller difference in Western Australia would mean if we install 2 solar panels above each vine row, then that would result in quite heavy, dense shadow forming on the vines, whereas with only two solar panels above each row in South Australia and in Victoria would not impact or would not cause as much densely shadow condition as in Western Australia. Right, so once we consider these 4 kinds of designs, and these designs are also inspired from the sites. So as Sabine mentioned, in Victoria and in Western Australia, there were solar panels above each row of the each vine rows, and those solar panels were 1 solar panels above each vine rows. And in Southern Australia, there was 1 solar panel above every other vine rows. For example, in Southern Australia, VB3, and then VB1 in Western Australia and Victoria. So once we got with these design things and all, so we then this flowchart is to represent how we did the modeling work. So in order to do a modeling work in any location, first thing is to get weather data for that location, which we obtain from Queensland government's website, Silo website, Silo data for 100 years, because we also wanted to see how different weather condition in each year, variation in weather condition would then also impact on yield. So that 100 years of data was fed into both models, but then the model which we used for solar energy yield prediction or modeling, it's called System Advisor model. It is a well-validated model developed by National Renewable Energy Laboratory in US, but it operates in sub-hourly or hourly time scale, whereas the software which we use to model vine yields runs in daily time scale and is called APSIM. So APSIM is Agricultural Production Simulation Modeling Software developed by CSIRO. It has vine model, which was built and validated using extensive experimental data in New Zealand. So the first part of this project was to validate this grapevine model according to Australian condition, because New Zealand condition is a little bit different than Australian. So during the first part, we collected data from different vineyards across Australia, which is reported in literature. And according to those data, then we calibrated these grapevine models and then validated it so that we are confident whatever the model outputs is what we observe in the field. So this validation exercise was done for Shiraz species because we could find most data for Shiraz species. So again, coming back to this modeling thing. So when we got this daily time step data, then it was converted to hourly time step so that we can calculate how much energy is generated using a system advisor model. To model it, we have to give inputs such as what is the spacing between the solar panels, and also how many solar panels are in each row. We also determine at what tilt angle can these solar panels will produce maximum energy throughout the year. So for 1 year, what tilt angle and which direction would it face to generate maximum energy. So, and then this software also gives us a very interesting output on how much solar radiation is received on the ground below the solar panel. So meaning that solar panels, when the sunlight comes and strikes solar panels absorb that light, but then there are certain more sunlight that goes below the solar panels, which is reduced in comparison to full sun condition. So that information was used to determine for given layout of solar panels, how much reduction of sunlight was below the solar panels. And this input was provided to APSIM, where to model under the reduced light condition, how much vine yield can we expect. So for APSIM, we provided input such as vineyard input like vine space, spacing between vines within a row, irrigation and fertilization data. This irrigation and management data was matched with what we did in pilot projects. So this is overall modeling framework. And little bit of background on solar PV generation. So for our analysis, we consider 1 hectare of land. So let's consider that 1 hectare of land, and suppose there was no vines, and if we were going to use that 1 hectare of land only to produce energy. So to produce energy, we would then like to optimize energy production for that piece of land. So we consider 250 by 40 meters of 1 hectare of land. So in each 250 meters, I calculated how many solar panels can I fit, and then the spacing between the solar panels. So I use different spacing. So when I use less number of rows, so 10 and then go on increasing to 24. So as we know, if more solar panels are on the field, then the energy generation will be more. But then there is this effect, like if we try to keep these rows of solar panels very close to each other, the rows in front of us, in front would cast shadows on solar panels on its back. So that would mean we are not producing as much energy as we would produce. So that is represented in this graph. So with increase in number of rows, the energy generated per installed capacity starts to decline, and it really starts to decline from this point as compared to when they were 10. So that effect can be seen in the increase in percentage shading loss. So based on all of these information, we then I then found out what would be the optimal layout. So that optimal layout would maintain 2% of loss. So the annual energy generation won't increase more than 2% because of this self-shading loss, and selected that tilt angle, which would then maximize energy generation for that year. So there were these 4 Vitivoltaics designs. So these 4 Vitivoltaics designs were according to the vineyard design. So if vine was facing towards the east, then the solar panels would face towards the east. If they are facing towards north, then obviously, so in the southern hemisphere, if the solar panels are facing towards the north, then they will produce more energy than if the azimuth angle is changed. So the first box plot is for optimal PV layout. So this optimal PV layout has ground cover ratio of around 0.54 for Western Australia. So that would mean there were 18 rows of solar panels within that 1 hectare land. And then for VV1, because there were it was dictated by the space between vines. So the space between vines was 2.4 meters. So that means there were less number of rows of solar panels, and also they were facing towards, not facing towards north, but towards the orientation of vines themselves. So that resulted in a little bit less energy production from that field, which was about 80% of energy being generated. For VV2, as I mentioned briefly, if we go on increasing number of rows in the field, we are going to generate more energy, but then that would mean we are not generating as much energy per installed capacity because of that shading losses. So although it shows we are producing more energy from that field, it's not very ideal from investment point of view, because we are not generating as much energy as we would have generated if they were appropriately spaced out. And then the fourth one, and the third one is VV3, where every other row had a solar panel on top of it, which was producing 42% of the optimal PV. And the fourth one is very similar to the VV1 design, but only the difference is that every other vine row had 2 solar panels. So in effect, the number of solar panels in the field were same. So that would mean they were producing almost same amount of energy, and it was about 80% of the optimal. Right. So, and similar results were obtained for other sites as well. So for Dookie and McLaren Vale. Only one thing to note in in Western Australia is that the spacing between the vines were very small. So that means more rows of solar panels, more solar panels were installed on that field. So they were producing a little bit higher energy. Plus also the Western Australia location had higher solar radiation receiving location than it's compared to Dookie and South Australia, and the efficiency of panels was also a little bit higher, bifacial solar panels. So that all of these different factors contributed to higher energy generation than is compared to Dookie and McLaren Vale. But the trend is very similar. PV2 had more energy generation, but not the energy generated per installed capacity was not very efficient. Whereas VV1 and VV4 had almost similar amount of energy generated. So for Dookie and McLaren Vale, it was about 75% of the optimal. And let's go on towards vine production. So we are comparing vine production. The first row is full sun, so that means if there were no solar panels in the field, as compared to VV1, one solar panel above each row, VV2. So as I mentioned, the distance between vines were not much, only 2.4 meters, and the solar panels length themselves was 2.1 meters. So that means if we were installing 2 solar panels on top of every vine rows, resulted in excessive shedding of about 92% of sunlight was intercepted by solar panels. So for very less amount of light reaching the vines, so that resulted in significant, almost no production vines for VV2. So that is not very ideal design to choose. Whereas for VV1 and VV4, it was about 75% of vine yield. It's compared to no panel treatment. And for VV3, it was about 90%. And in some years, the vine yield was more in VV3 than in full sun condition when there was no panel. So, and we are also trying to investigate the soil moisture level and stress, vine stress during those years to better understand why we observe these results. But what we expect is that during those years, there was more stress on vines in full sun condition than in VV3. But these are preliminary results, and we have still more work to do. And when we compare the results from other sites, very similar to the Western Australia in Turkey, the VV2 treatment in Turkey is a little bit more because the spacing between the vines was 3.5 meters. So that resulted about 75% of sunlight being intercepted by the solar panels. So that means 25% radiation, reduced energy, reduced vine yield, but not like in Western Australia where there was almost no production. And very similar VV1, VV3, and VV4 results. Only in South Australia, there was this more interesting result with solar panels. There was kind of increase in yield, vine yield, and for VV2 there was significantly more, but we still need to investigate on this, and these are very preliminary results at this stage. But some of the results with Sabine discussed about bird damage reducing overall yield, but the single berry yield, single berry weight was more than in full sun conditions. So those results are quite similar to these modeling results. And one thing I have to mention here is that this calibration and validation exercise were done for full sun condition, meaning there's no sun, no solar panels, so open field condition. We did this calibration and validated the model outputs. But after installing solar panels, this reduction in solar radiation might have also influenced model outputs, which is not yet validated because we have very limited data to validate our model. Right. So overall, in conclusion, VV1 emerged as most balanced design because there is this one solar panel above each rows, and so that would mean that we can produce 80% of energy, at least for Western Australia location, and 75% of full yield, vine yield, compared to full sun. And also there is this added advantage that vines might protect, panels might protect vines in extreme conditions such as heat waves and hail. So yes, but then VV4 also produces almost same amount of energy and vine yield. And overall, when we look at land use productivity, comparing how much one land can produce energy and vine, as compared to if that land was only used for either vine production or only energy generation. So overall, the land use productivity increased to 155% for Western Australia, and for VV3 treatment, it was around 130% as compared to single land use. And similar results is obtained for other 2 sites as well. And only in South Australia, since the solar panels also improved yield, so that would mean more land use productivity, which we still need to investigate more and confirm the result. So overall, my conclusions of this finding show that the vine production and solar energy generation can successfully coexist and help us to produce renewable energy and also vine production from the same land. That's it for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ganesh. I'd like to open it up now for any questions any of the attendees have of our presenters today.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment as a pro-silver forester, which is about holistic forest management. As I think like a forest, and when people talk about food forests around the world, produce not specifically wine, but shelter is a key factor. So that's just one tick. So there's a whole range of givens that one could assume why. And you are doing now the research to actually put numbers to it. It's just as crucial to have that linkage between the real world, science, and then compare the two rather than in isolation. It's just a comment.
Yes, I agree.
The only thing that strikes me is the bird damage is never quantified in the open space. So
Yes, there's no bird damage in open.
There's nothing to.
Use the
It's just an extra. It's probably. I don't say you can discount it, but it was there. It's still there.
Yes.
There's nothing. There's no figures to say which way it went.
Yes.
I had a comment on the bird damage as well, because perhaps the production was so much greater that the birds could see it and were attracted to it, and they kind of went, oh good, we've got structure to sit on, we've got an increased yield, it's terrific growth.
We thought they prefer to have lunch in the shade.
Yes, this is a great place for the birds to enjoy the crop.
And I can say, like the magpies love the structure. They use it like either on top when it's not too hot. When it's hot, they use the shade underneath, and does all the time.
So that was interesting. Well, we're just going to totally avoid the netted ones because we've worked out the disadvantage of the nets to the birds. So that data possibly is useful in future.
I do have a question. Were all the panels the same distance from the ground, or?
So
There's a variation. Before.
Yes.
That was just before you came in.
Yeah, that's why I came in late.
It's not big.
Yes, the differences were not much. I think for Western Australia it was 3.4 meters, and for Victoria it was 3.5 or 3.6.
We have 3.6. I think 3.3 is Western Australia, and 3.85 is South Australia.
Yeah, so similar.
Similar, but not quite.
Really. The ground changes that much if you walk.
Yeah, no, the difference would be between here and here, obviously.
But Ganesh, maybe you know that makes a difference, right, in terms of how uniform the light is underneath. I think the closer you have it to the canopy, the more stark shade, sun effects you have, and it becomes a little bit more even when the panels are higher up.
Why were they different? Why are they different in WA as compared to
price of the structure?
Price.
Yes.
That's what I was going to say that the more these go up, the more expensive they are.
Yes.
And is that necessary, or does that?
So okay. So from Germany, they have like 4 meter high structures, and because they drive even with combined harvesters underneath, and also for the light conditions. So I wanted to have 4 meters, but I couldn't afford because my structure is aluminium, whereas from 3.6 meters onwards, you need steel, and I didn't have the budget for that. So South Australia, they went really high. They are on 3.85 meters. They made the structure in-house. So engineers from the University of Adelaide were building that. And I think for that, they got a better deal and they could afford it. They also have a smaller area than I covered. So it's just like, there's so many different designs. There's not like just one design.
Were the distance between the vines the same?
No, so the distance between vine in Western Australia was a little bit less, only 2.4 meters.
They're narrower over there.
Yeah, and then for Victoria and South Australia, it was very similar, 3.5 and 3.6.
How about in comparison to Germany or Europe?
No idea.
That's what I'm wondering. Are you in contact with other viticulture research in other universities like Geisenheim or You know, there's different ones in Germany or Austria. Or...
So right now there are 2 or 3 research papers published from Italy. They are quite doing work in Vitivoltaics in Italy. There are some unreported work in France as well, like not in scientific publication, but we know they are doing that, but no, not direct contact. This is my first opportunity to work with vine production.
So Geisenheim have just installed an agrivoltaics facility in a vineyard.
That's right.
Yeah, it's not
There's
long.
good people there too.
Yeah.
So do you think the height of these systems influences airflow underneath them? So that,
Oh, yeah.
It would be as well.
yeah.
Yes,
So did you measure any of that, or?
So we have some microclimate data, but it's still early time. Yeah, early days. So even I haven't looked at all the sensor data yet. And we also had a huge hiccup, like the cockadoos actually destroyed 2 of the sensors and they came in for a feed and then they, thought it's fun to
So
chew
don't
up
have
some
cockatoos
cables.
in Italy. Which particular cockatoos? Whites or blacks or?
Sulfur crested ones.
Right.
Destructive. So I have a question to the material. You said steel or aluminium.
Yeah.
Those are heavy carbon footprint.
Yeah.
What about timber?
I love it, but I don't know like if somebody would do it. Yeah. So I have actually a group of architects coming and once a year, and they just look at different structures at the campus, and they're interested in the agrivoltaics. And I asked them whether they can come up, with a design that would be like lower carbon footprint, maybe also suits better into or flows better into the landscape.
Sure.
Because vineyards, they are attractive to people to have a nice time, and not everybody's keen about steel. But with the design, it was funny because they said, you talk to the wrong crowd. We love steel. So it was not like, it wasn't really helping. But yeah, I think, timber, I don't know.
There's obviously
hemp,
challenges
Grape, I don't
now
know.
anyway.
Yeah.
I was at I think 2 people in this room were there. There is certainly an urgency now of rethinking what we are doing in all forms of primary production and whatever we do. So there's a bit more openness, I think, in coming weeks and months to think about different materials or different factors, more complex, rather than saying, oh, it's all too complicated. It's complex,
Yes.
but it doesn't mean it has to be complicated.
Yes, I've seen one paper where they were proposing using trellis structure to also mount solar panels above. Yeah, and it was using wooden, but yes, solar installations are very long duration, like 25 years, go through different wind loading, and also the structure should be very rigid to withstand weather and also the
Termite resistance, etc. So there's all sorts of factors, sure.
Ganesh, can you just flip back to your final conclusion, please? And
Yes.
just, I think I was just wondering, as per your conclusion, VB1, where was that most exemplified by any one of the particular models? Like,
yeah, so that is
also
for
in WA.
per WA.
Can you just repeat that, please, if you did already say it?
So for this WA,
That one there.
yeah, so about 75% of energy generated, 75% of yield, vine yield, as compared to if there were no solar panels. And also for WA, about 80% of energy generated is if that land was only used for energy
Those just like
generation. So
that
combining them.
figure is generated to represent greater period of time than the actual model time.
Yes, yeah. So these simulated outputs are for 100
they're
years of
exponential.
100 years of weather conditions.
Yeah, so it's fairly reliable. Then it's not just that season.
Yes,
was a
only
great-
1 year
yeah.
would then like very much.
Okay, thank you.
So this box plots also 100 years of variation. So that is why there's quite a bit of.
I'm getting confused with the 4 models from memory without it in front of me. Thank you.
No, it's-
Sounds great.
Excellent. Got no more questions. Are there any questions online, Alison? Excellent. All right, well, we can sort of finish up now. We've got a light lunch next door for those that want to hang around. Thank you for attending.